Hey guys, Squiv, the Lazy Geek here, and welcome back to the channel. And yes, I am still alive, despite doing stuff like flying into very turbulent conditions and doing pretty sketchy landings yesterday. But I'm still here, not even a scratch. Anyway, today we're going to talk about N.I.N.A 1.11, which is not officially released yet, but nightlies are available, meaning like the latest development snapshots, basically, of N.I.N.A 1.11. And of course, the stable version right now is N.I.N.A 1.10, and if you're happy with N.I.N.A 1.10, you should not upgrade to 1.11. But 1.11 has this amazing new sequencer that can do so much more than what the current sequencer, the thing that lets you program your targets and exposures and does everything automatically. But it does, so the new one does so much more, or is able to do so much more than what the old one does. But it does require the end user to think very long and hard about what they want to do. There are some great tools though to make everything a bit simpler, and I'm going to go through this hopefully briefly today. So let's get to it. Okay, the first thing again to know about N.I.N.A 1.11, you can see I am on version 1.11.32, which is indeed, as is written in big letters here, a preview version. It's a preview version, and it can absolutely mess with you, have bugs, lose imaging times, and crush your telescopes against your tripod, all this kind of horrible stuff if you're not careful, or even if you're careful. So yeah, only use this version if you like living on the edge and getting the most features out of it. And if you do find bugs, make sure to report them to the N.I.N.A development team. Talking about that, I have not participated in the development of N.I.N.A 1.11 at all. So if you have congratulations to give, don't give them to me, give them to the developers of N.I.N.A. They're awesome, and it's obvious they worked a lot to make this version happen, or they're still making it happen since we are still in the nightly releases. It is not officially the stable version right now. Anyway, how do you get to this version, by the way? If you don't know, you go to Options, General. In your version it will be tabs rather than those little nice icons here. But you want to search for Auto Update Source here and set it to nightly, again at your own risk. Once you do so, you will be rewarded with a big warning telling you this is a preview version of N.I.N.A. So again, it's up to you, and it's on you if something goes wrong. Otherwise, you also may want to upgrade ASCOM at the same time to the latest version, because this version of N.I.N.A does require the latest version of ASCOM, as far as I can tell. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into the fun stuff. So here I have N.I.N.A, it's not connected to anything, and because I don't have a telescope right next to me here. But what we're going to do is we're going to go and say that, I'm planning for a sequence. I want to take an image of M42, so I'm in my Sky Atlas. Maybe I'm doing some framing, and I want to add stuff. I want to add my targets to sequences. And you can see when I do that, you have two things, simple sequence and sequencer. So that's new, right? If I go to the Sky Atlas, same thing. Not slew, but add to sequence. I'm going to click this time for now on simple sequence. And simple sequence, it really gives you, as its names would imply, a simple sequence, which is pretty much the same thing that you had in N.I.N.A 1.10. And you have your usual options. You have your target, you have start to guide, slew to target, center target. You have something new, rotate targets, which will use the rotation angle used here, which is great if you're using like the framing wizard and you're rotating stuff around. Whee! And let's go back to my sequencer, and you have your estimated finish time, you have your autofocus stuff as always, like the options don't seem like they have changed. You have your actual sequence here with the number of exposures, the exposure time, etc. But one of the big changes that you see here is that your start of sequence options and your end of sequence options, they're now at the bottom here, so they can be set up per sequence rather than be in the general settings and be automatically applied to each sequence, which is nice if you want to create a sequence that will just take flats and flat darks for instance, or dark flats, whichever you prefer, then you may not want to arm the camera and park the scope at the end, depending on how things work for you. So that now you can do that per sequence, and just that, it's awesome. Now, while it looks and feels like the old sequencer, under the hood, it's actually working off of the new sequencer. And if you want to see how it looks like under the hood, you could click on this little button here, and it will give you a warning that it's a one-way operation, because it will go from a simple sequence to an advanced sequence. Once you're in an advanced sequence, since that has more features, you're no longer able to convert it back to a simple sequence. So think hard and long, and maybe save your sequence before you do so. So we can say yes, and we can see a full sequence in the new sequencer. But how does this work? What is this? Where am I? Might be what a reasonable person would ask about this, because yes, it can be a bit difficult to wrap your hand around this sequencer here. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to delete everything for now. And what we're going to do once I've done so is we're going to go back to no sequence whatsoever, and I'm going to start from a different template. I could do that differently, but just like as a standard flow, I could say, add target to sequence, and instead of simple sequence, this time I'm going to go into basic sequence target, which is here. And basic sequence target, by the way, it's a template that you have here. I'll go into that in a moment. But anyway, we are now in this new sequencer, and there are lots of things to take in. Now, first, let's look at stuff and see what is familiar to us. So what is familiar to us? We have a target here with the usual elevation graph of the target. So that's something we are familiar with the coordinates. Nothing has changed there. We have things like, okay, we want to slew to the RA deck of the target. Yeah, that makes sense. We want to center the target to center it via plate solving. We may want to rotate it as well, if we have same as the new rotation option that we have here. And we could want to run autofocus and start guiding before we start the sequence. Up to that makes sense, right? And then we want to make a meridian flip, and we want to, what is this? It's not quite there yet. So those are triggers, and I'm going to get that there in a moment. So really where things get interesting is when you look at the bottom here, you have actual actions for imaging. You have switching to a filter and taking an exposure. And you can see those two things. Well, the filter, you can choose your filter, and the exposure, you can choose your exposure time, the type of frame, the binning, the gain, if your camera has offset also, the offset. This kind of stuff is available within that text exposure action. And if we look a bit deeper, you can see that we have some kind of a container here, which is really called a set. And I've just changed the color theme to make it a bit more obvious. So we're now on the kind of the default color scheme. So you have this 20 times 30 seconds kind of container or instruction set that we can see it from this icon is actually sequential. It will go from one instruction to the other, one after the other. And so what this says is that it's first going to switch the filter, then it is going to take one exposure. Wait, that's it? So we're only taking one exposure? That's not the case. We have another thing, which is here a loop that says we are going to loop this for 20 iterations. So what's happening is that all of the instructions in this set, in this little container here, which I can collapse and expand, will be done 20 times. So we will first switch the filter to whatever, let's say red filter, then we will take one exposure, and then we repeat both of those actions. Now the switch filter, if it's already on the red filter, it does not do anything. So it's just going to get ignored going forward, unless the end user goes into the filter wheel and changes the filter, then it will be rechanged to red as an action. So this will be done 20 times. Okay, but what about stuff that needs to be checked in between exposures and that should basically interrupt the sequence to do something else? Things like autofocus, like meridian flip, like dithering. Well, it is done using something called triggers. And you can see we have here a trigger that says within this box we are going to dither after a certain number of exposures, which is currently 3 exposures. But since it's actually 300-second exposures, I'm going to put dither after 1 exposure. That way we'll be dithering every single exposure. And what this does, what this trigger does, is that basically after each instruction is run, we will get a check for both the trigger and the loop condition. Basically, we switch the filter, then we check, do I need to dither? And then we also check whether we still have not exceeded 20 iterations of looping yet, and whether we should just interrupt this particular loop, this particular set. And then we go to the next step, take exposure, and once the exposure instruction is done, we do those 2 checks all over again. So those are things that are basically checked every time an instruction is done. And by default, a set, if it does not have a loop condition, will not loop. It will just happen once. So if we look above there, we have this set called target imaging instruction set, which contains my final switch filter and take exposure instructions in the whole set in there. It does not have any loop conditions, so it will be executed only once. I could add a loop condition, and I can do that by clicking on the plus icon here. I could find loop conditions on the right and just drag and drop them in there and say that we are going to loop this for 2 iterations. In which case, what's going to happen is that we will go through this box. This box will loop 20 times. Then we check this and we see we need to loop this box for 2 iterations, and so we're going to loop it twice. And so in the end, we're not taking just 20 exposures of 300 seconds in this case, but we'll be taking 40 because we are looping stuff around across multiple sets. So I'm going to remove that by just dragging it to the trash can, or I could just click on that trash bin icon, and you can see I can also make a duplicate, and I can also reset it if there's any progress that has been made. So I'm just going to delete it right now, and I'm also going to look back at this set here, which is this 20 iterations loop. We can see that it will check for dither in between each instruction from one instruction to the next, but here it does not explicitly check for meridian flip or for autofocus conditions. And it should do that, and it is actually doing that. And the way it is doing that is that both the triggers and the loop conditions, well, like when I go from one instruction to the next, whether it's switch filter to take exposure or take exposure then to switch filter, we'll be checking the loop conditions for the current loop as well as the triggers for the current loop, but we'll also be looking at the loop conditions for the parent loops or the parent sets, if any, and we'll also check the triggers for the parent sets as well. And then you can see this target imaging instructions. If I contract it, it's also within another parent set, which is called the target, and it actually has the target information. And we have here, again, triggers and loop conditions that could be here. So if I added a trigger here, then it would also be checked when I switch from one instruction to the other. And so that's how everything interacts. So we have the instructions that are basically done at various levels. Those things, slew to RA, center, rotate, they are instructions that are executed first within this set, the Great Orion Nebula target set, which does not have loop conditions. So this set will be executed only once. A set only gets executed once per if it does not have loop conditions. And as for that, it will slew to RA, center or rotate, run autofocus, start guiding. Then it will look at this set here, which has 4 instructions that it will execute this set here, which will switch filter and take exposures 20 times, dither after every exposure. And it will also, in between each instruction, it will check whether it needs to do a meridian flip or an autofocus after HFR increase or autofocus after filter change in here. And there are tons of things that you can put as triggers in there. We could have the autofocus after temperature change put in there, or we could also have autofocus after temperature change put in here. The level at which, so if I put the trigger here, because this set, this Great Orion Nebula set, is a parent to this set and a grandparent to that set, then it will be checked between each instruction. So it's a bit mind-blowing. We have three sets, a set within a set within a set, inception, and it can get a bit complicated, but once you understand how it works, it's really, really convenient because the level at which I put stuff can be super interesting. For example, I could do something very, very simple. I could take the trigger that says the loop condition that will loop for a certain number of iterations, and I'll put it here, and I will say that I want to loop that 3 times, for instance. So why am I doing that? I'm doing that because I want to periodically re-salute my target and recenter it in case my guiding has gone wrong, or maybe I'm not guiding and I want to make sure that even if my polar alignment is not perfect, I still go to target from time to time. And by doing so, what this does is that it will run those 20 iterations here, and then it will run them 20 times, right? And then we'll redo this target set, and so we'll recenter once, then we'll run this 20 times again, and once this is done, we'll recenter again, and we will run these exposures once again. And so we'll be running 60 exposures, and every 20 exposures I'll be recentering to my target, which is pretty cool. So this is things that are really interesting to put in place. And with this particular example right now, because it's so simple, it wouldn't really matter if I put my autofocus after HFR increase. I could put it here in those triggers here. I can put it at the bottom here. It doesn't really change anything. Where it will change something is if, for example, here I'd be taking exposures in H alpha, for instance, 300 seconds long, and then I can make a copy of this set like this. Or I could be like, you can see sequential instruction set here. I could be drag and dropping it here to add multiple filters. I could have a second filter that says we're going to loop for 100 iterations. So we're going to do, like, let's say 100 per 30 seconds. And it's going to be the red filter this time. And we're going to be 30 seconds here. And we're going to dither every 5 frames. So then it's nice because I do not need to re-specify within this set that I want to check for meridian flip after each instruction, or that I want to check for autofocus after each instruction. It's basically inherited from my parent set here. And if I had triggers at this top level here, they would be inherited as well. And what is cool as well to remember is that those loop conditions get checked for the current loop as well as the parent loops, which means that we have loop conditions that take into account altitude, for instance, and we could say that we want to loop while the target here is above 30 degrees. So if I put it in here, if I put this loop condition here, after each instruction that is done within that particular set, whether it is this instruction, this one, this one, or the instructions at the very bottom, so between each instruction, it will check whether Orion's altitude is still above 30 degrees. If it is no longer above 30 degrees, it will just stop running this particular target and go to the next one, because I could have another target, let's say M31, that's waiting to be taken. That doesn't really make sense in this season. I would probably want to do the reverse, but whatever. And we are going to add the target, and we now have the Andromeda Nebula underneath, which means that as soon as the altitude of Orion is below 30 degrees, like it could be really in the middle of this loop, for instance, then we'll switch to the next one. But at the same time, it also means that as long as the Great Orion Nebula is above 30 degrees, then we will run those two loops here, 20 times 300 seconds, followed by 100 times 30 seconds. And if after those two loops are done, we are still above 30 degrees with the Great Orion Nebula, we will rerun this again. And so we will re-slew to target, center, rotate, run the autofocus, start guiding, and then we will again keep exposing until suddenly Orion is below 30 degrees and we go to the next target. So you can see how very important which level you put things in is, because it really affects how the imaging run is doing. So I think we're getting a bit closer to understanding here what's happening. And really, what is really cool with the sequencer is that there are so many tools that are available, from dome control to moon altitude and moon illumination and sun altitude. So we could, and you know, we can wait until, like if you search for wait for time, you can wait until a certain time in the evening, and we know wait for time span. So wait a certain number of seconds, wait until above horizon, wait if sun altitude, all this kind of stuff is available. And there are so many possibilities in there, including running an external script if you have a program that you need to run at any, like at the end of a sequence or at the start of the sequence. You can warm the camera, you can really do so much, including controlling your flat panel. So much is possible to really automate everything exactly how you see fit. And there are actually additional things that are possible, because we talked about those sets and how those sets are executed only once unless they have loop conditions, how loop conditions and triggers are double checked after each instruction is run, and how they are checked not just for the current set level but also for the parent sets that this set is within. But we also have a different type of set, which is the parallel instruction set. And the parallel instruction set, really, I could put this like at the very top in the sequence start area and say that at first I want to accomplish multiple actions exactly at the same time. Let's say I want to cool my camera and I want to turn my dew heater to on, and I want to open my dome shutter. I wish I had a dome. And I want to unpark. I think we should have unpark somewhere. Unpark scope. Here it is. And we could also search via this plus here. All sorts of stuff are possible. And all of those instructions, they're not run sequentially because I have a parallel instruction set. They're run at exactly the same time. So at the same time, all of this will happen in order to not waste any time. And so this is really convenient to have. By the way, we looked at also two other types of sets. We had the very simple sets of iterations there, like the sets of a sequential set that just performs the instructions one after another. But we also have seen here a target set, which is exactly the same thing as a sequential set, but it contains a target, and thus it can use conditions like loop while altitude above something. And these conditions can also be used by any of the underlying sets, even if they are not target sets, right? Because they'll be inheriting the target from their parent sets or their grandparent sets. So this is how it works. And also you do have templates that are available by default. Like we have a basic parallel sequence startup that can just drag and drop here, that will do some stuff like cooling, exactly what I showed. We could have a basic sequence end here at the end. You can do all sorts of stuff. You can copy, duplicate stuff. You can put them in the trash, delete them, or just drag and drop to the trash. You can move them up and down, you can reset them, you can save as a template, and I'll go that to a moment, or you can save as a target as well, that round button here. Like, so much is possible with there. And you saw me doing those templates, and it's important to know that those templates you can actually create your own as well. So if you have your specific set of instructions that you've created and you're satisfied with it, you can rename it to say like my targets sequence, and I can then either drag and drop this to the template, or I can use this round button here. Sorry, not the round button, the save button here. And the save button here will add this as a user template. And the user template, you can open it to see all of the instructions, all of the stuff that we'll be doing. And if I go back to the Sky Atlas and I do add target to sequence sequencer, now I also have a new template that's available, my target sequence, and it will use all of the same operation sets and loops in there, except they will be adapted to that particular target. Although this will only appear in there if this is this is a template that has a set with a target inside, so we can actually replace target coordinates. So here it is, and if you want to remove a template, you can just drag and drop it to the trash to remove it. And you saw me click on that round icon here by mistake earlier. This actually added the the my target sequence, sorry, to the targets, to a targets list, which I can just reuse again by drag and dropping. So it's not just a template of the actions being taken, it's actually specifying an actual target, so you can just reuse that day by day if you're taking exposures of the same target across multiple nights. Now there are some, I was mentioning how in between each instruction, so once an instruction is complete, we will be checking the loop conditions, we'll be checking the triggers, and we'll be doing that for the current set as well as any parent set that has triggers or loop conditions. Which means that in this case, like after I switch filter, for instance, I'll be checking that we should still be looping, I'll be checking whether we need to dither, I'll be checking whether the target is still above 30 degrees, and I'll be checking whether there's need for meridian flip or autofocus. And there is some instructions, and you can see they're here, smart exposure and take many exposures, that are actually sets of instructions disguised as an instruction. So let's say instead of take an exposure here, I can delete that and put take many exposures. This will say that I will take 3 exposures of 300 seconds each. So what we see is that because this is taking many exposures, it will take 3 exposures, then it will loop for 20 iterations, so it will take 60 exposures in total within this particular set. But there is one thing that is a bit different. This take many exposures in the background is actually its own little set inside. And so it's actually a set that says it would loop 3 times, and in each loop it has a single instruction, which is take an exposure. And by that I mean that N.I.N.A will not wait until you've taken all 3 exposures to check whether you should dither every exposure, which will make it just not work. It will actually check after each exposure, because this single line, this single instruction is actually an instruction set. And the same is true for the smart exposure, which is, again, you can take many exposures, but you can also say how often you want to dither. And so that smart exposure really can be a shortcut. Instead of having this set here, you can use a smart exposure. And within smart exposure, it's actually a set, and we'll be checking for autofocus and for meridian flip and whether the target is still above 30 degrees, even if a smart exposure, all of the frames within that smart exposure have not been completed, because in the background this is a set. And there is one more thing that is also pretty cool, is if I go to the imaging tab, you see you have a sequence area here, and it has a summary of everything that is going to get done in this sequence. And honestly, how cool and how awesome is that? I absolutely love this. This is, I don't know, it makes my brain explode. I love it. So this sequencer is extremely powerful, but it's extremely easy to make mistakes as well, because you're really programming your sequence and you can have bugs in your sequence. So test it out first. Make sure you don't lose imaging time. And once you know you have a set that works well, save it as a template so you can reuse it and you know it's going to work well. It's very easy to mess things up by putting the loop condition at the wrong level, the trigger at the wrong level, all this kind of stuff. You need to really think about it. But anything is possible, including if you have a USB coffee maker and you feel like making an ASCON driver for it, it might actually be possible for N.I.N.A to make your coffee in the morning. Yeah, anyone wants to try that? If you do, please let me know. I'm not sure whether USB coffee makers exist. But anyway, this is really what I wanted to cover in this video. Now, I also want to shout out to another video. So there's a long-time user of N.I.N.A who is absolutely awesome, made a great video about this sequencer as well. It's super well explained, and he explains it from a really like granular approach, like building block per building block, rather than me just throwing you into the new sequencer. He gives examples that go from a star tracker to a full go-to automated setup. It really is gradual, super well done. I'll put the link up above and the link down in the description below. If you want to learn more about this sequencer, watch the video. It is great. And with that, thank you so much for watching. Today is the 21st of December for me, which means that I will be watching the Jupiter and Saturn conjunction, and I hope you'll be able or have been able to watch this well, depending on where in the world you are and when you are watching this video. So with that, as always, thank you so much for watching. If you're not subscribed to this channel, feel free to consider subscribing if you like astrophotography and N.I.N.A and you want to learn more about stuff in general. You won't be disappointed. You may also want to click that little notification bell so you know when there's a new video coming out. But you know, otherwise, thank you so much. Don't forget, whenever you can, to look up at the stars, and I'll see you next time.